Okay, time to be more professional. Hey Louis, how are you doing?
I can't get used to the switch up, you know. But hey, how's it going? Welcome
Yeah,
back to more of something else entirely. There we go. That was an intro.
that I think that was an intro. Are we gonna add an intro song at some point? Is that like does it need to be
Yeah,
introy?
I was gonna bring that up actually. Um, was that we've had some lovely feedback from people.
Sure.
Um, some some people being like, oh, very nice to just hear people chatting shit about music. Some people have gone and got away and listened to the album. One person was confused why two white boys were talking about spicy food. Which, if you leave two white boys in a room for long enough, at some point they will start talking about the spicy food that they've eaten, and how much they enjoy eating spice.
it
But
it does become. I was just gonna say it does become a bit of a pathetic competition sometimes. Like, I think there is something very white about talking about your spice tolerance. But I could be wrong. Who knows?
somebody else brought up that we should have a jingle or like an intro theme or something like that. And I think that'd be quite a fun idea, but I also don't know what it could be
Mm.
jingle wise. So if you want to have a think, if we want to do a little bit of humming to each other back and forth over the coming weeks, send each other some voice notes of little um jingles, because it can't be anything too like outrageously complicated, because that kind of like it's just kind of like a little ease you into the session, and then maybe ease you out of the session at the end as well.
Yeah, should we be making like an actual jingle then? Because that actually sounds quite fun. I sometimes annoy Hannah by just making jingles out of everyday life. To be honest, that's it's one of my favorite pastimes. Just singing along to the most irritating one is the avocado song, which literally just goes avocado, 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 avocado. There you go. That's the avocado song.
That's pretty catchy. Have you considered pitching that to Big
I
Avocado?
might do. I feel like I've probably got it from somewhere though. It must be a melody somewhere, or maybe somebody else's.
You've lifted it from something
Almost
else.
certainly, almost certainly. But it's there lodged in my brain, and it just sort of comes back sometimes uninvited. And
Do you have something off the dome for this? More of something.
yeah, off the dome is hard. More something else entirely. It doesn't really flow as a lyric, I guess, does it? But
No, I think it would have to be more kind
although,
of like a tune, wouldn't it? It'd have to be a little bit
mm,
of a not that.
uh, I've actually I've been in Lisbon and Porto this week with Hannah,
Oh
and we
shit.
went to. It was amazing. One of the things we did in Lisbon, we went to see um, fado music, which is uh, basically Charlie's boyfriend David described it to me like operatic folk, essentially, which I think is a pretty good description. So it's yeah, very melodramatic Portuguese folk. So I could do a fado rendition of of something else entirely, which we can then cut out if it's too embarrassing.
I'd love to hear that.
More of something else entirely, entirely. There you go. That's
Wow. That was actually incredible.
that's fado for you.
I'm not sure I'm not sure what kind of vibe it ensues. Like, say you had someone coming on for the first time. Oh, I'll give this podcast a go. I don't really know what it's about. I think it's probably about albums or something, judging from the image, but I'm not sure. And then it's just
I think
some very operatic Portuguese.
it might scare people off, man. I think let's.
I think it would intrigue people. I'd be intrigued. I'd be like, is this like some kind of weird Radio 4 murder mystery energy going on?
Some Agatha Christie stuff. That's yeah. I think let's brainstorm it. I'll have a think about jingles. Let's see if we can come up with anything.
It's the kind of thing that comes to you when you're in the shower. I
Mm,
think. When your brain's not thinking about anything else, and then all of a sudden you just start kind of humming away to yourself songs that don't exist,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they're the ones that could be potential jams, potential jingles.
I think that's the way to do it. How have you been, Louis? What's been going on?
Sorry, I'm just having a massive drink because I've got a bit of a sore throat.
Oh no.
So if there's any just some like sudden pauses and you just hear me like gulping, it's that. It's not COVID though. It's just
I was about
like
to say,
sore throat
because
after.
it's back. COVID's back. The
It's
the
back.
news has been telling me.
It's back, and this time it means business.
COVID. Well, it wouldn't even be COVID 2, would it?
It's tagline.
It'd be more like if
No.
COVID were the Fast and Furious franchise, you know, like number 17 of COVID.
It's like COVID 13. Yeah. Fucking hell.
Yeah.
No, well, it's because we had a we went out. We did we did the Otley Run on Saturday, which is that Leeds pub run
Yeah.
that I thought more people knew about, and then it turns out that loads of people were like, what's that? Is that an actual like 5K or something? No, it's far less healthy than that. It's a series of excessive drinking, but it's like a whole day thing. So I think my throat's probably a little bit fucked from that. But that was fun. I don't remember a whole lot of it, so just in fancy dress for the majority of it. I'm far more interested to know what else you got up to in Lisbon, to be honest.
Now I've got one or two more questions about the Otley Run. What was your fancy dress?
I'm just deflecting. I'm like, I don't want to.
Because fancy dress is a bit of a tradition on the Otley Run, isn't it? I think I only know about it via Maddie,
Yeah.
as in Hannah's sister.
It is swarming with people in fancy dress, and I think they're there every single weekend doing it. Because in my head, I always thought it was like an event thing, but obviously it's not. It's just like you can go down any weekend you want and do the Otley Run, and any weekend you do it, you'll do it. There'll be people doing a stag do, or just doing a night out, or doing the a birthday party. So you're there at like 11 a.m. in the first pub because you got to get there early, otherwise you're going to be queuing for your pints all day. So you get there at 11 a.m. and you're in the toilet and there's already a Teletubby snorting cocaine off his key. So you're like, yeah, this set the mood.
That might be the most British image I think I've ever heard of.
There's a couple of impressive costumes, but there's a lot of like, oh, I've just gone to the costume shop and bought the £20 like generic, mildly racist costume, like stereotype. There's a Tiger King that was pretty good, but then there was a lot of just like generic Scottish man, generic Arab man, generic. There was a lot of Jimmy Savile's. There's a surprising amount of Jimmy Savile's, like an excessive amount of.
I mean, you know what?
At least like there was one Jimmy Savile who looked like he was by himself, like he didn't have like none of his mates were in fancy dress. He was just Jimmy Savile.
He just by himself. He just rocked up as Jim. You got to explain that one.
He was with this other group of people, and they were just dressed normally. And he was in the Jimmy Savile tracksuit and wig, and then they bumped into a bunch of other Jimmy Saviles, and they were all having a little bond.
That's a really disturbing image.
It's weird how he's become like a pop culture icon for being a nonce.
Yeah, I mean, on one level, I kind of get it. I get why Jimmy Savile would make good fancy dress in that like he's a very distinctive character, but I would have thought that would have become less popular, not more popular, since the revelations.
Yeah.
Something's kind of gone a bit topsy-turvy there.
Something's gone wrong there. Yeah. But it's that classic just dressing up as like whatever you can. Like it's very British energy to dress up as things that like you're taking the absolute piss out of it.
Shock factor, I guess.
Like, yeah, it is always about the shock factor. But I wasn't anything quite so offensive. I was Linguini from Ratatouille.
Which one's Linguini? The main guy or
the guy with the rat in his hand?
Yeah.
the main guy.
Oh, I could see you pulling that off. So you dressed up as a chef. Actually, no, I
Basically,
saw a photo of you as a chef.
yeah, that was me in fancy dress. That
Did
wasn't
you?
just me going to work.
Oh, no, well, I didn't think you were working as a chef, but I did think maybe you just done some fun, wholesome kind of cooking activity.
Chefing. Did you
Yeah.
not see the rat in my pocket?
I don't think I did. I see most of my friend news via Hannah on Instagram, so I sort of got a glance of it. I didn't really get a proper look at it, um, which is my
Well,
defense. That's my
yeah.
defense.
It's not that you didn't care, it's that you didn't. You just had a glance. You just had a quick glance.
It's pretty much always a glance, really. I probably ought to get Instagram, but also at this point, I think I'm just gonna.
I wouldn't recommend it. I'd say avoid it.
I think I'm gonna hold my
You
ground.
know. But have you got any pictures from like Portugal and stuff? Because I haven't seen any of that yet.
Uh,
It's gone up anywhere.
well, yeah, this is more of the same problem. I don't really have anywhere to post it other than
You're not gonna
Facebook, I
post
guess.
anything. I haven't seen Hannah post anything either.
She's probably carefully
Although that
waiting
might be
to.
my fault for just not going on it.
She might be waiting
All
to.
right, swooping at the right time.
Yeah, exactly. Um,
Yeah.
so that might appear sometime soon. I would show you some now, but I feel like photos don't work well on
It's
podcast
not.
form.
Yeah, it's not audio content. We could just have a nice 15 minutes of me going, "Ooh, look at that! Ooh, that's nice."
Yeah.
I'll describe it for the audience that doesn't exist. It's a really sunny picture, and Ronan's wearing sunglasses, and he looks very nice.
I, you know what? Part of me is tempted to do that, but I feel like the joke would run dry quite quickly. But
Is that like an ironic podcast? Is that like post-podcast meta
yeah,
commentary irony?
yeah, postmodern podcasts.
Yeah.
That might be my other side podcast, along with First Lady Facts or whatever I decided it was. It
Yeah.
was First Lady Murderers, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that podcast has fallen flat, and in its place, I'm doing my postmodern podcast.
I
but-
like the idea of like a little solo Ronan podcast that just has a completely different theme each episode. Just what? Like what? Like one's like the murder podcast, then it's your postmodern podcast. Who knows what the third one will be? It's just fucking out there shit. There'd definitely be an audience for that. There'd definitely be like, this is my favorite podcast.
To be fair, I've got to give a shout out to Blind Boy's podcast, which I might have mentioned before, but he's not that dissimilar to that. He just has kind of a whole variety of different podcast formats. He has sort of obviously sort of usual Q&As. He has mental health podcasts, but he also just does hot take podcasts, which can be anything from a fairly close to the history or informative kind of thing to just him having clearly gone on a late night Wikipedia binge and just drawing tons of connections. And it's great because it's kind of like an antidote to Joe Rogan, who sort of, to some extent, can sort of clearly enjoys sort of conspiratorial thinking, you might call it. But Joe Rogan, I'd say, does so completely and utterly irresponsibly. Blind Boy tends to just come up with his own light little things, and is very
like in a fun way. And
yeah,
like,
and is very clear about his sort of flaws and the fact that, I mean, ultimately he's an artist, so he's or a storyteller. So I think that he enjoys telling stories first and foremost. He's also not just a right-wing bigot, which always helps. Shout out Joe Rogan.
It's always nice that, you know, us as really massive creators can take the time to shout out smaller creators like Joe Rogan and Blind Boy, you know?
I know.
They really need the boost.
They do need the support. Yeah. Jumping right back to the Brits Abroad theme, Hannah and I met two British lads and an Australian guy that they picked up on the street, I think, like a couple of hours before on our last night, and we had the full Brits Abroad experience, I feel. The Australian guy in particular, so it turns out basically Australians abroad, I think, based on this sample of one, are even worse than Brits abroad. he was um, he was actually just quite rude, to be honest. But then it sort of passes it off as Australian humour. But
Australian charm, yeah.
yeah, but I got a free drink out of it because he just really early on when we'd met them, he just told me to neck my drink when I just bought a drink. And Hannah and I had been planning to have like a, one more casual drink, so sip it slowly, and then we'll go off and get some food. So I had no desire whatsoever to down it. And he kept on insisting. And I kind of said, tongue in cheek, oh, yeah, well, if you'll buy me another one, of course I'll do it. And they said, yeah. So not gonna lie, I'm still buzzing about that. I just got to finish my drink and then get another one for free. It was possibly the highlight of the trip, to be honest. It was great.
You're pulling off some high tier social manipulation there.
Yeah. Honestly, I felt like
Know how to work the room.
I want it on my CV, as negotiating skills. I feel like everybody would understand that.
I negotiated a Australian who was bullying me into downing my drink into making me down my drink, but I also got a free drink out of it.
And if that isn't
Is that the brag?
yeah, if that isn't compromise, I don't know what is.
That's true, to be fair. Was it one of those big nights where you start out super late on your like last day of the holiday and then you travel home feeling horrible and hungover?
Sort of, to be honest, but I feel like I didn't actually feel as bad as I thought I was gonna feel. It was all right, it was all right in the end, and we had loads of delays on the flight and everything, but I still got back just feeling refreshed. I think that's just a sign of a good holiday.
A good holiday.
It did the trick.
That's what you needed.
Mm.
Oh, good shit. Kind of jealous. Portugal's lovely. Lisbon's lovely.
It was amazing. Have you been?
I've been once with family, and we did a lads' holiday once there as well, which I know is an interesting choice. But we're a very cultured lot. Clearly, we spent a lot of time in the bars.
That's the way to experience a culture. That's there are worse ways.
Very
Very.
Good place to burn off the drinks because you are just going. I do remember actually dancing. This is like you have those nights out, and a lot of it's kind of just browned out drunk noise, but then you have like a fleeting, very, very strong memory. And I have a very, very strong memory of like being down by, I think it was a beach or like a harbor or something. We were by some water and someone just had a speaker and that they were dancing with their speaker and we all started dancing in like a circle and just having this weird little like ritualized dance session together at like 4 a.m. That was great. I couldn't tell you where it was other than the fact it was near some water and it was near like an Irish pub. And I think it was near the market, but that might be completely wrong. And maybe it wasn't even Lisbon, but I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was. That's one of my strong memories from the trip.
I can't immediately tell you where that was from that description, but it sounds very plausible. It was Lisbon. Not that I saw any Irish bars, but I'm sure they were there. They're everywhere. They're all over the shop.
They're everywhere. That's kind of I kind of don't like them because they don't feel very. This is a completely off-topic tangent, but I just feel like they're not very authentic. I think they try too hard.
Oh nah, yeah. I mean, they are
Anyway.
they are literally a sort of fabricated island, but that's almost everybody knows that. It's almost like everybody accepts it's like a representation of a representation after a point. It's kind of like there's
I just find it interesting that there's that kind of obsession with this idea of going to an Irish pub and there are always the shittest bars there. Like all the other bars are so much nicer and airier. Like they always go for that kind of grim, gloomy, worst pub on. Like if you went to like Scunthorpe and you found the worst pub on the street, like that's the energy they're going for. They're going for that like baked-in smell of alcohol, and that's like the charm. Like, oh, come to our Irish bar. The tables are sticky, and you're like, well. Not all the bars in Ireland have sticky tables. Actually, some of them are really nice. Like this is just a really odd like thing to fixate on, and I don't know who's making these. Is there that many Irish like immigrants who are in Spain and Portugal making these Irish
I mean, there
songs?
are like Irish
It's
immigrants all
American.
over the world. Like it's one of those diasporas that's like bigger than the actual original population. So I think I've got this right. The Irish diaspora
Mm.
is bigger than the population of Ireland. I think by quite some margin.
I wish they'd have spent more time in Ireland and got a better sense of how nice the pubs in
But
Ireland are before
well,
they left. Shit version.
but that's just it. That's why it's fascinating because it is like it's almost like everybody knows it's this just sort of fake image of Ireland. It's sort of
Mm.
yeah. In fact, I'm pretty sure that there might be a Blind Boy thing on this where I think he says that like it's partly in cooperation with like the Irish government might have like a fund to set up like Irish bars or something like that. I can't really remember exactly,
Oh,
but let's say that they do because facts aren't important. It would sort of make sense because it's almost like this sort of
that makes for a good fact. Like even if it's not true, it's a good fact, right?
exactly
It's like part of Ireland's exporting their culture.
exactly
Like
that, and
it's the
it's
same
soft
with
power.
China builds a military base or an island, and Ireland goes to the soft power of shit pubs.
Which is more effective? Who knows? Need some kind of
Who knows?
international relations scholar to tell us that one.
Mm. um, shall we talk about the album?
Yeah,
Shall
let's.
we segue heavily into Mac Miller's Faces?
That sounds good.
I don't remember which way round we did it last week, but do I want to like give a little rundown, like a short little like this is the album,
Mm,
and then do you want to tell me about your because it's the first time you listened to it, right?
that's right. It's also my first time listening to a full Mac Miller album. I realized there were like I've heard him on a few features, and there are a few songs that actually Hannah and Charlie I think were really into that I knew. And I've
Yeah.
probably heard you play him before.
Yes.
But otherwise, I don't think I'd ever really had much proper sit down and listen to him experience.
Mm. So I'll just throw off a few little like Wikipedia sample bits of information. Faces.
Mm.
First of all, it's not actually an album, so we're only on the second episode, and I've already broken the formula. It's a mixtape, which might now that you know it's a mixtape, you might be like, oh, yeah, that kind of makes sense why it's the way it is. But it was released. It was initially released in 2014, so it's quite an old one. But that was a free download, and then it was re-released in October 2021, I think, and that was for streaming and for vinyl, and that was after Matt Miller had passed away. So it's kind of re-released and made available for everybody to get. And I ended up getting it on vinyl on a whim because the album art looked really cool, and I didn't really know it that well. And then I've since then listened to it loads, and I think it's my second favorite Mac Miller project, but it's easily my most listened to Mac Miller project.
Mm.
And apparently, on the Wikipedia, it's considered something of his magnum opus. Magnum opus.
Magnum opus,
That
I
word,
think. Yeah.
especially if you're considering like his moodier body of work. Because he does have like some of his songs are very, very kind of upbeat and like party friendly and radio friendly, and then he had this whole side to his discography that I think Faces falls into, that is much more kind of moody, jazzy, psychedelic
Mm.
like vibes. So yeah, that's my brief little kind of intro to what this album is. I'd love to hear your first impressions of it.
Great. Yeah. Well, if I quickly run through my thoughts, and then I've got a few small questions that can perhaps sort of direct it back towards you and steer the discussion a bit.
Lovely.
Does that sound?
That sounds good.
So I've listened to it only twice all the way through. I listened once on the plane yesterday and once again today. The first time I listened to it, I'd actually thought it was a posthumous release.
Mm.
That's a hard word to say. Just because of on Spotify, obviously it is. So clearly its official release is posthumous. And then today I was reading about it and saw that it's a mixtape, and saw that it's an older mixtape. So that's interesting. That changes some of the context a bit, because my first impression was, bloody hell, there's a lot of references to imminent death. And I was almost like, because I thought it had been released posthumously, I thought this almost feels a little bit crass to have included, or purposefully presumably, so many, or as I was thinking, so many songs where he's referencing his own death. Not that I was committed to thinking that it was crass. I was just like, how do I feel about this? Certainly it makes me uncomfortable, but so I was thinking about it in all this context of thinking it had been released after his death. In the new context, it's still just as powerful, just as uncomfortable, but in a slightly different way. I think it removes the idea that sort of record execs were really trying to labour that sort of point, and just creates like a much more raw sadness, I suppose. I mean, there's some really explicit ones that pretty much directly reference how he then died. I mean, he says something like, one day I'll probably die of a drug overdose in a hotel room, or something like that. So, I mean, that was my first impression, just the lyrics. Actually, I think the first line might include a reference like that.
Yeah, the very first line, sorry, to just because you are right, the second line, the first line being yeah, yeah. But the second line, should have died already. And you're like, oh.
Yeah.
You know.
I think that stuck out. That stuck out a lot. But on a more fun level, the next thing I noticed was a lot of fun levels of shade being thrown at other rappers, which I just quite enjoyed. So including, I don't think this was actually Mac Miller. I think this might have been the feature on the song. Oh no, this was Mac Miller. Did it all without a Drake feature. Then this one wasn't, I don't think. I love you more than Kanye loves Kanye. And then the one that took me about the first time I listened to it, enough that I actually skipped back to check I heard it okay. Fuck you, Kendrick. which, which just cracked me up. Just seemed so cheeky. And then I've looked that up since on Genius just to see if there was any actual beef. And it seems like it was a slightly sort of tongue-in-cheek response to a call-out Kendrick had made, where he was basically like, yeah, I support all of these other rappers, and he name drops Mac Miller, but also like, I'm trying to destroy you because I'm the fucking best. So that I'm glad to know.
Friendly, banterous rivalry.
Exactly, and I'm glad to know it was friendly, because it feels like that. It feels cheeky. It feels silly. I enjoyed that. So these are quite sort of scattershot impressions at this point. I've kind of just listed like impressions that it made upon me whilst listening. I guess then it's sort of the beats are just amazing. I love that jazzy sound. I love, like you described it, that psychedelic sound. There's a few brilliant sort of psychedelic flourishes. Like I wrote down here at the end of Apparition, I think there was this kind of these like waves of sort of psychedelic. I think it's like a reverse guitar sound, but it just really lovely. I love some of the organs that appear throughout the song. I don't know what it is about organs, but they can just be such an expressive instrument. Soulful, I guess, would be the word that's used a lot. I don't know why organs, more than other instruments, do that for me, but they often do. And then one other note, I just have to give a shout out to the Stuart Little line, where he describes the reasons we haven't seen Stuart Little movies lately is just because he essentially got too rich and famous and went on a binge and is kind of it's just a like funny, absurd, and a little bit sad, I think, and just felt in keeping with the whole themes of the album. That's a very scattershot view of my view of the album, but hopefully gives a bit of a sense. I guess there's no overall argument that I've made there. I've more just sort of given my impression. I wanted to ask you, because you asked me this as well, and I think it's a good question. really, like, what's your story with this album? I guess you've given a little bit of that, but more importantly, I guess, why did you pick it? Because you didn't so much touch on that.
Hmm.
And with that as well, if you could also sort of talk about what Mac Miller means to you, I guess, more broadly, because I think you are a proper Mac Miller fan. And so it's, it's not just this album, whereas I guess with Lamb Chop there was an element to which it was particularly that album.
Mm.
So yeah, why did you pick this album? And talk about your feelings on Mac Miller more broadly.
Um, I'll touch on first. I'll touch on the. While I would say that I am more broadly a Mac Miller fan, I think I do lean towards this kind of energy of his, which
Mm,
is this kind of moodier, jazzier. I want to say it's more experimental stuff. I am a fan of like some of his more kind of fun and funky um kind of mainstream hits and mainstream albums. But when it comes down to like picking my favorite projects of his, so I said this was my second favorite. My first favorite is Circles, which was the posthumous album.
mm,
So this is something I wanted to touch on when you were talking about um listening to this and assuming at first that it was a posthumous release and thinking that it was a little bit cynical in a way.
mm,
I think as like music artists who've passed away goes, and in terms of like the label, um, kind of taking the piss when it comes to Mac Miller, it's all been handled really, really well, really elegantly, and it just feels like it's kind of brought like a nice kind of. It's been a nice bit of it's been a nice swan song to his career. Whereas a lot of other artists, like XXX Tentacion, I think is like the perfect example of someone who's been milked dry. Like every possible voice note that he left on his phone has been turned into some kind of song. Whereas everything that's come out posthumously for Mac Miller, it is only two things. It is this re-release, and this re-release is literally just this mixtape. We're bringing it out to streaming, and we're going to bring it out to vinyl, and that's just kind of for the fans in a way, which is really nice. And then Circles was the posthumous album that dropped shortly after his passing away, and that was a lot of stuff that he had been working on. And it was what was nice about that project was that it wasn't just to my knowledge, it wasn't just like the studio going, we need to get another album out and get some money out of this. That was his friends and his family wanting to kind of bring some closure with this album, and Circles is for that reason a very kind of tragic album. It's a very emotional listen. I think it is, which is why it's my favorite. But it's also I don't listen to it as often because for me, Circles is a much sadder experience. It's a little bit when you're feeling a bit down, a bit blue. There's some really funky songs on there. I think Blue World is really fun. I know, I'm talking about a different album now, but just putting into perspective first the fact that Circles is my favorite, but because of like the emotional weight it carries, it's not an easy listen. And I think that's where Faces for me falls into place because it still has this kind of moody atmosphere going on, but it's still very fun, very tongue in cheek. And to me, it just has that kind of chill vibe that you could put on like a nice sunny afternoon, like at the barbecue. I think it stands up by itself as like if you couldn't figure out like a playlist to make, if you hadn't like thrown some artists together yet, you could very easily just go, you know what, Faces. It's long. It's a long mixtape. It's an hour 31, I think. Um, so you can just kind of whack it on and just happily let it kind of play along in the background, and it's just full of so many fun samples and like little production flair. And I think Mac Miller produced quite a lot of this
oh,
himself.
really?
Under he had a he had like a it's not an alter ego, but you know what I
An
mean, like
Elias.
a stage name, but for your production side of things. Yeah, there you go. He had an alias of Larry Fisherman. That was his kind of production name.
Mm,
Um, and so I think a lot of this was his working, and I think, and then along with like some of his regular collaborators and stuff like that. And the reason why I wanted to mention to you that it was a mixtape and not an album is I don't know if you noticed, but like listening through how like sample based every single song is. Like every song is like a sample that's been taken and chopped and slowed down or reversed to create this kind of fresh sound, but also like there's something about every song that feels very familiar in like in a welcoming kind of way. Like every song kind of comes on, you're kind of ready to just kind of like you get
Mm.
eased into it. I don't know if that makes
No,
sense.
it does.
Like it's all very like familiar.
It's part of what I suppose not all sampling does this, but a lot of sampling is able to induce a sense of kind of collective nostalgia because it's often,
Mm,
I'd say, especially if it's sampling either well-known tunes or sort of genres that have become so embedded within the kind of broader
mm,
21st century zeitgeist, I suppose, that it almost has this, a sort of collective sense of nostalgia, I guess, what I'd describe it as. Again, that's not always what sampling does, but I think it can very much have that effect.
It's always interesting to hear how people play off samples as well, because I think
Mm.
you can play it very safe and just maintain the same kind of like the melody that
Mm.
the original had, or you can chop it up, screw it up, and remix it entirely to the point where you're using the original sample more as kind of a beat or a loop versus a melody, and I think that's always really fun.
Mm.
Um, I think anyone who I was going to ask you if you noticed this. I think there's a lot of samples on here that I think some people will pick on and other people's won't. But I think the one that immediately stood out to me, where I was like, I've definitely heard this used before, is right on the title track, which is Inside Outside. It samples a song called My Lady by the Crusaders, I think it's. And that's used by the place I'd heard it before is Water Baby by Tom Misch, if you know that one.
Oh right,
You might not
I
know it
actually
off the top
don't
of
know
your
it
head.
off the top of my head, but I'm sure if I played it, I'd suddenly recognize it.
Mm.
Um, oh, that's interesting.
I know it was one of those ones that was like big at uni.
Mm.
Like Tom Misch was like very prominent when we were at university.
Mm.
I think like second year was kind of like peak Tom Misch, right? Everyone was kind of putting him on the summer playlist and playing him at the park and the beach and stuff like that.
Yeah, we went to see
Um,
him.
which makes sense because it all came out in 20. I think Water Baby came out in 2018, but that uses the same sample,
Mm.
at like a different speed and different tempo, or whatever. And I was like, I definitely know what this is, so I had to obviously go away and Google what the sample was. And while I was doing that, it turns out that My Lady by the Crusaders has been sampled 39 times in like 39 prominent songs, like not just like small artists, like 39 major artists have sampled that song. So it's clearly like a go-to nice melody for
Sure.
everyone to kind of throw in.
And that's a perfect example
I
of,
think it does work really well.
yeah, absolutely. That's why it then becomes sampled so often. Often these things,
Mm,
that's a perfect example of that sort of shared sense of, a memory of something that I was talking about. But also just there are just some melodies or just some sounds as a whole that are so malleable and just so great as they are, but then also offer so much potential, partly because of that
play with.
greatness that's there within the kind of bedrock of it
Mm,
all. That's really interesting. The one I noticed was I had to look it up because I recognized it. I couldn't work out where it was from, and I can't remember which track it was on now. I'll check that whilst I talk. But it sampled "In a Sentimental Mood" by John Coltrane and Duke Ellington, and I,
oh,
I think that's an example of something where even if you didn't know the song specifically, I think you'd recognize it because it's one of these sort of songs and probably samples as well, actually, that's so repeated and so
mm,
ingrained in sort of popular culture that I think most people would have a similar experience of familiarity with it.
mm.
It's on Diablo, I think. That piano line, the do do
Diablo,
do
yeah.
do do.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, And that's just
I think
gorgeous.
that's what makes like it is, yeah. That is a really nice little melody, little beat switch as well that they've added to
Mm.
it. I think Diablo was the one track off this mixtape that was released as a single.
Right. Okay. That's also interesting to
So
know.
that's one that is like will be ingrained in people's memories as like one of Mac Miller's singles.
Mm.
That's part of what makes it such a fun little project is with it being a mixtape and with everything being so heavily sample based, there's clearly all these little auditory Easter eggs. So I've picked up on one sample and you've picked up on a completely different sample. And you could go through every song and probably like pick apart which little bits of instrumentation you love and like where it originates from and what other songs it's been used in.
Sure, yeah, and that's some people are sample heads, you could call them, almost more than they're hip hop heads or sort of
Mm.
electronica heads or whatever you know whatever the different terms might be.
I I have a huge appreciation for sample culture because it's like you spend time digging through thousands and thousands of like older songs, newer songs, and you're just keeping an ear out for anything that could work. Toss it into an audio editing software, cut it up, loop it up, whatever. Like I think that in itself is just just a fascinating way of approaching music. Just always being on the lookout for like how can you recycle and reuse and make something new and interesting with something like old. And that's why I've got a lot of respect for like you know, even that artist like Kanye West, like as a producer, got a really impressive backlog, and a lot of it is because he just has spent the time. It's that element of like taking the time to go back and find these samples.
Oh yeah, I mean this is no slight on Kanye, at least not in this context, because Kanye is
Mm.
actually an incredible and a pioneering producer, but I suspect he's also probably helped now by a whole team of people who are able to
Oh yeah,
sort of
yeah,
source that kind of
yeah.
stuff for him. Although I don't know exactly the extent to which that's true. I know that that's very much true for some super producers, but it might not be in
Mm.
Kanye's case. Somehow,
I see. I think at the point where you become a super producer, definitely, but like in everyone's kind of early days, and that's why I like this about Faces, is because this was 2014, quite early Mac Miller, although not super early. He did get on the scene very young, but
mm,
back in the day, it is more of a case of like people who are big lovers of music and big lovers of hip hop going through like boxes of vinyls and just searching out random little snippets
mm,
of songs to use.
yeah, it's an incredible culture. A lot of admiration for it.
I think as well, I always enjoy a sample that's from like a movie or something like that. You
Mm,
know, um, a little bit of dialogue from somewhere. I think in the past when I've dabbled in very 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 lightly in making a song or two, I like the idea of throwing in a little bit of dialogue to kind of set a scene or set a mood. And I think you've done that a few times with your
I'm a
stuff as well,
huge
haven't you?
fan of that. Yeah, and I can only assume that one of the reasons, just like with all other kinds of sampling, one of the reasons why it's not done more is because often you get into legal troubles with it because it is such an effective
Yeah.
tool. It can just
Mm.
immediately elevate something, I think. But maybe I'm just particularly obsessed with it.
It's something that I love on the track. It just doesn't matter. That obviously starts with the big
Mm,
speech from I think it's from a movie called Meatballs or something like that. I did look it up, but I don't have it on me, so you just just kind of take my word for it. But it is Robbie Williams doing the speech, which is why it sounds so
mm,
familiar and just getting so amped up. And I think that really kind of sets the tone for that
mm.
song in particular. And I think that makes it feel a little bit more of like an anthem than the rest of the tracks. Like you can, if you are in the mood to just shout that it just doesn't matter, you can do it alongside that intro track. But it's interesting that you brought up the legal implications of it because apparently there was some extra dialogue included at the end of the song on the original release that wasn't cleared for the streaming release that we've been listening to. So like that some of that song has changed due to the fact that like you say sampling can be a little bit tricky when it comes to the kind of the copyright situation
Yeah,
with
that makes
that.
sense. The other one I came across that seemed to be like that was there was supposed to be a Hunter S. Thompson sample, I think, on Funeral. And I found it on YouTube, and it is a nice touch. But I guess songs can often survive without them. But yeah, they are just beautiful flourishes, and like you say, it's kind of hard to imagine it just don't matter starting without that. It's kind of central to that opening of the song.
It would always be a shame to see him though, because like you say, it is like the
Mm,
artist's vision is those little flourishes. Like those little touches are what add a lot
mm,
of character to a song. Is what takes it from being a very flatline, mundane beat like a Drake song into being actually something creative and
mm.
interesting to listen to. Just a quick dig at
Yeah, in the spirit of Mac Miller, we're
I
throwing lots of shade this session. Yeah.
throwing some shade. I did think it was funny that you picked up on that line about like did it all without a Drake feature. I thought that was obviously good for the time, but I feel like it's even better now because it feels like it's a dig at Jack Harlow before Jack Harlow even came onto the scene. Like before Jack Harlow was even a twinkle in his dad's eye.
Has a
Like
has a Drake feature helped him?
he he's like recently released his kind of like album. I think it's is it his
Mm,
like first album? Or, like he's one of those guys who's been on the scene for a while, and he's like, he's done a load of features and he's gained himself a load of momentum, and he finally gets around to releasing like an album, and it was very mediocre, I think. But he
sure,
did have a Drake feature on there, which obviously made that the most played track
of
of the
course.
album. And it's not a good song. It's really boring. I don't
Oh,
say that lightly. I don't. I want this podcast to be this is a positive space. We only throw shade. we don't. I think I quite like Jack Harlow, but like that song, not great, but still his probably. I think it's probably his most popular if you looked at his Spotify page now. And then it is just funny that you got Mac Miller out here very clearly proclaiming way way back in the day that he doesn't need a Drake feature, and he doesn't because he has that kind of. I think as an artist, he did have that kind of creative flair that made him stand out from the crowd. Like it wasn't necessarily that he was like the best. He didn't necessarily have the best pen game or the best beats or like any one thing in particular. It was just kind of with Mac Miller. I think it was his overall package, like the personality that he offered and
mm,
the little tongue-in-cheek like bars and some lines that are a little bit just like a little bit much, and but some that are just like very very fun. And I think um I think there's one bar on San Francisco. I think it's on San Francisco that every time makes me like smirk at it being a bit much.
mm.
Which is about his girl watching Insidious with her pussy out. And it's just like, yeah,
Sure, yeah. There's a few things
okay.
that just like are thrown out there, and you're not quite
Mm,
expecting them. Um,
it- yeah.
Almost like I feel like that's like a non sequitur as well, isn't it? I could be misremembering, but because I think I noticed that line. I swear it just jumps out of nowhere.
It just
Um,
comes out of nowhere. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
But maybe there's some way to analyze that more deeply and get a hidden meaning there. Who knows?
Mm. I think you're digging in a very shallow pool there. To be honest, I don't think there's much to it other than it's just a funny throwaway line.
I mean, it's like that Stuart Little line I kind of loved. Although the Stuart Little line I think does have
Mm.
a kind of wider resonance despite its absurdity. Um,
Yeah. It's not just like a throwaway sex line, basically.
sure, yeah.
I do appreciate that you picked up on the fact that like when you were first listening to it and you thought that it was just a posthumous release, because of a lot of the lyrics are quite dark in the context of what actually like did end up happening. Um, it's an interesting mix of an album in the sense that when I talk about Circles being my other favorite, that's very prescient because of the fact that he just passed away, and there's kind of a lot of lines talking about that kind of the things that he was kind of struggling with. Whereas this one, with it being from 2014, you do have this weird mix of you do have these fun, ridiculous lines that make you smirk or make you cringe or just you just enjoy, and then you do have like, you know, straight out of the gate with "Should Have Died Already."
Mm.
And there's a lot of lines mentioned throughout about like, oh, I'm sure my dad wished I only did weed, and I'm sure my grandma would beat me for the drugs I'm doing,
Mm.
and like everyone's worried about what I'm doing in my studio and stuff like that. And yeah, they can't it kind of weirdly like sadly kind of prophetic of where it's going, and it almost feels like it was all inevitable in a sad, like it was just like leading that. It almost feels like it's, I don't know how to kind of phrase it, but it almost feels like it was kind of written, and Mac was very, very aware, and at the time everyone must have kind of seen it as kind of tongue in cheek, or oh, this is just Mac's kind of dark humor. But then, you know, when we're kind of listening to it now and it's like we're at the end of the road, you kind of look back and see it all leading this direction. It is just ultimately tragic, I think.
Yeah, I was actually gonna. This was gonna be one of my questions to you because I think there is something clearly powerful about an artist's death, especially when there's some kind of connection to that artist. I think a lot of people will have experienced some version of this. My one was at uni. The singer of a band, Frightened Rabbit, killed himself essentially.
Mm,
Um, and this was one of these bands that was very much my growing up staring out the car window band, you know, my moping band.
yeah.
And he has a song that very explicitly sings about considering throwing himself off the Fife Bridge, I think, in Edinburgh, I want to
Mm,
say. Must be Edinburgh, or sort of near Edinburgh. Or maybe Glasgow. Who knows? I'm not sure that's particularly important to the story.
mm,
Um, he, yeah, he just describes sort of the thought process, thinking about doing it, and sort of deciding to put it off. Like, and it's a kind of incredibly, almost anthemic, hopeful song with this very dark undercurrent because he never says he's not going to do it. He just
yeah.
says he's going to put it off for a little bit longer. And yeah, that was exactly kind of how he did it, and I think I got lots of sort of echoes of that
Mm,
and that feeling. As in, I literally couldn't listen to them for ages afterwards, because it was just, especially that song, because it was just too close to the bone, and I could feel some of that in the Mac Miller album. And I don't know whether you were listening to him when he passed away. This is kind of getting into
mm.
darker territory. Did you discover him after that, or did you discover him
Yeah.
before he passed away?
So I actually only got into Mac Miller posthumously, which is
Mm,
something that I think is a shame, um, in
mm,
hindsight. But it was only after kind of he'd passed away, and then this kind of discussion about what like impactful artist he'd been, and like the art that he'd actually created and left behind started kind of circulating. And it was with the release of Circles, and then, you know, obviously that got a lot of reviews and media attention. It reviewed really well, and that was kind of the same kind of period where I was starting to get more into exploring and discovering new music and more into kind of album listening. So that was kind of a
mm,
starting point for me. And then it was a case of kind of going backwards and working through his discography, um, and finding like which bits I enjoyed more or less. Funnily enough, actually, I think we were on holiday when we were on one of the lads' holidays. I think it was when we were in Krakow when we got the news that Mac Miller had passed away, and only one of us really listened to him at the time, and
mm,
they were like obviously quite upset to get that news, and everyone else was like, I don't really know who that is. And then it's one of those things where since then everyone's kind of come back and been like, oh, actually, like I listen to loads of Mac Miller now. Like, sorry that
mm.
we weren't more, you know, on the ball,
Yeah,
on the actual day. Um, he does feel like one of those people that like a lot of people have come to since in my
Mm.
circles. Um,
No, I think that seems possible. I think it seems quite common actually. People's reputations almost grow after their death. I'm not sure I have anything particularly insightful um, to say on that, but it is a phenomenon in our society, perhaps a problematic phenomenon. I'm not sure. Almost this kind of romanticization of that.
of who they were,
I
yeah.
suppose you'd see it in things like the 27 Club and just the 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 regularity with which an artist's death is part of an artist's story, and on one
Yeah.
level, that's a consequence of the lifestyle of artists, but I think it's also partly a consequence of how we tell these stories. And I think so. If I were to bring up a Frightened Rabbit now, I wouldn't be able to bring them up without sort of bringing up the fact that the singer died.
Yeah.
And similarly
It
with
recontextualizes the whole body of work, doesn't it?
it does, and on one level, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when so often these artists have lyrics that so clearly seem to be prophetic, like we've been saying. But I do think there's another element that is something about our slightly. I say this because perhaps I'm guilty of it as well. Our slightly excessive romanticization of that troubled artist story.
Yeah.
Um, you know, given that there are so many artists that really don't struggle at all. They just produce art. It's interesting the fact that we can't shake this image of artists that's based on individuals such as this. I mean, another one I'm thinking about would be Joy Division, who also similarly grew in sort of reputation after the singer's death, and very much the singer's death is always in the conversation. And also, I guess another one would be Nirvana, which seems quite similar. And yeah, like I say, I don't think there's anything particularly insightful there. I just thought it was something that I was thinking about whilst listening to this album, and so I thought it was probably worth mentioning, even if I don't have too much to say on it
Yeah.
that's particularly new.
Well, it's something that you
Um,
can't unless you are completely detached from like you don't if you don't know who Mac Miller is, you don't know that he's passed away. I think that would be an interesting experience listening to this.
mm.
Which, you know, anyone who listens to what we're talking about now won't ever get to experience because now they're very well aware that he's passed away. But like unless you don't know anything about the artist and you just go in and you listen to some songs, that's the only time you'll have this kind of detachment between the fact that the artist is no longer with us and passed away under like quite tragic circumstances. So when you have that knowledge of what happened, it like completely does recontextualize every song. It adds a lot of emotional weight to places where there probably wasn't as much before. And yeah, it does add that kind of prophetic sense to things. And in a way, it adds this kind of sense of helplessness in a way where you are witnessing someone maybe spiral or talk about suicidal thoughts or talk about their drug problems, and you know that it ends in tragedy, and that adds kind of a I want to call it bittersweet, particularly in the context of Faces as a mixtape, because there's a lot of raw emotion on display. I think mixed in between the tongue in cheek and fun lyrics, there are these kind of moments and beats where you're hitting on something that's real, and that's made all the more kind of prominent because of like the tragedy that kind of came of it. And it's like you were saying about how you kind of do focus in on the fact that like you know it is the obsession with the tragic artists and the tragic artists art that they create does always seem to end up in an elevated position, um, for better or for worse, because of what kind of happened to them.
Mm.
And I think Faces is one of those mixtapes that is left as a. I think it would have always been highly rated, I think it's more highly rated. And I'm not saying this is like undeserved. I think it's a fantastic project, but I think it is more highly regarded in hindsight with the knowledge of like what all these kind of lyrics kind of come to
Mm.
mean. And it adds kind of more to the darkness and the moodiness of certain elements of the production as well, because then that carries a lot more emotion. And I think people can come to this project, and you can listen to Faces, and you can listen to Circles, and you can listen to it almost kind of in memorandum almost. It is almost like a funeral song,
Mm.
like track 12, Funeral. It is something that you listen to in memory of, um, and you can definitely get emotional thinking about that, especially if you're very into that artist. Is that you can hear them at their most like raw and their most kind of honest, and you can pick up on the little subtleties that maybe weren't picked up on the time, and I think that adds to the experience. Um, yeah, whether that's a good or a bad thing, I'm not sure, but it's definitely an aspect of the project, I think.
I agree entirely.
Mm, just looking at what else I wanted to say, and I think we've covered most of it. But I will say I think there's some really strong features on this
Mm.
album, particularly from Earl Sweatshirt.
Agreed.
I think he's got some baller lyrics on this, baller
His
bars.
flow as well.
He has such an iconic voice.
I think I don't know whether I've heard this or whether I'm making it up based off how I hear him, but there's almost definitely some MF Doom influence there in terms of how he moves on a beat is simultaneously so smooth
Mm,
and yet sort of unpredictable. I think there can sometimes be a kind of divide in artists between those who are sort of smooth, but part of being smooth can be a kind of sort of predictability. Like I'd say a Tribe Called Quest are rarely kind of like trying to blow your mind with their flows, trying to kind of throw
mm.
you off. They're just trying to like
They're grooving.
ride the beat, and they do it. They're grooving exactly that, and they do it incredibly
Mm,
well. And I'm struggling to think of perhaps. I'm not super into Eminem, so this might be a inaccurate representation of Eminem, and I'm sorry to all the Eminem fans out there if so. But I'd say sometimes Eminem has incredible flow in terms of what he does with it, the unpredictability of it. It's not always the sort of smoothest thing to
mm.
listen to. I'm not sure he's trying to be the smoothest thing, but so that would be an example of the other end of the spectrum. But then there are just a few artists that somehow combine both, and so Biggie I
Yeah.
think kind of does this, where his flow is incredibly complex, but just the smoothest thing you've ever heard.
I think a weird word I'd use to try and describe it, and this might sound off, but it is because you compared it to MF Doom, is Earl Sweatshirt and Biggie as well. There's something like villainous about their flow, which is
Mhm.
very much taking the thing from MF Doom of being, being the villain, but it's like they're just it's just dripping with character and ambience, and like it's just like you say, it's smooth, but it's also commanding without being loud, without being complicated. It just, their voices just grab your attention and ride the beat. And yeah, I don't know why villainous is just the word that comes to mind, but I think that is just because of the MF Doom comparison.
I wouldn't be surprised if the MF Doom thing is an influence, but I suppose I definitely get what you mean there in the sense that there's a confidence to it when they do that, and there's a kind of
Yeah.
uh, sort of careless attitude, sort of like a sort of Pixar villain,
That's where I'm thinking, yeah. You've got
who's
your classic comic book kind of Disney kind of just a bit very kind of full on villain, like pure villain, not evil, just villainous, like
Syndrome from
fun.
Incredibles. Is that Syndrome?
Yes.
Um, you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
when everybody's super, no one is. with all the energy
Yeah.
that brings, and the way that he goes, "You sly dog." I don't know. I'm now just
Yeah.
thinking back to The Incredibles, and I'm not really sure what any of those images mean, but it's somehow this is making sense to us, but
Yeah.
it might not
I I
make a
think
whole lot of sense
somebody
to them
somewhere will
now.
listen and be like, "I know exactly what you mean," and then a load of people would just be like, "What the fuck are you talking about?
That's good enough for
Utter
me.
bollocks." But either way, the interplay between Earl and Mac works really well.
Absolutely,
Like
absolutely.
all the features, the chemistry is just spot on, I think. Like everybody on this album has turned up. They've understood the assignment. They're having fun. They clearly have worked together quite a few times. Like they're not, it's not just like no one's phoning it in, no one's in it for a paycheck. Like this is like everyone feels kind of passionate and prominent on the tracks that they're on. And it's what makes them all such a joy to listen to. I think my only criticism of the project, and it's not that it's really a criticism, it's just that it's quite long, so it's quite hard to listen to all in one go.
I, I'd
Um,
agree. That was my initial impression. It's a common thing throughout hip hop, though. Hip hop has this problem of overloading projects. It's especially a mixtape
Putting
thing, I
too
guess,
much, yeah.
but it extends to their
Mm.
albums as well. Um,
I think in a way with a mixtape you can be more forgiving because you can understand it as a main. It's kind of like a delivery method of being like, "Yo, here's a collection of these tracks that I've been working on. Give them a listen, give them a sample." It's not really like a combined vision. I think if you were
yeah,
to turn this into an actual album, you'd definitely kind of streamline it, cut a few bits and pieces out. But to be honest, I'd struggle streamlining it in terms of removing tracks because I feel like every track is really good. So I'd probably just have to make two separate albums. Just cut it in half.
which is another hip hop thing. Just turn it into a double album. So,
Mm. Part one and part two.
yeah,
Yeah.
I sometimes find that irritating as well, but I do fully
Mm.
understand the desire to do it, so I can't slag it off too much. Um, and it means you get more content if you're a fan, so there's that as well.
Yep. Do you have any favorite tracks that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, I think I've got to give a shout out to Diablo and New Faces with Earl Sweatshirt.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I narrowed it down to Therapy for just complete fun banger kind of track. Um, I also have to give the condition that I got the feeling that these would change as I listened to it more. And maybe that's always true of
Yes.
albums,
Yeah.
but I particularly got that with this. Therapy very much jumps right in with an impression, so it was sort of an obvious pick. Polo jeans with Earl Sweatshirt, that beat and Earl Sweatshirt riding it is just incredible. And then I went for Rain, Vince Staples and Mac Miller. I loved Vince Staples' verse. I think it's also one of Mac Miller's stronger verses, especially in terms of the flow. And the beat is just gorgeous. It's exactly the sort of thing I love, just chilled, laid back. Um, yeah, I think they're my picks.
Overall, did you enjoy the listen? Were you glad for the recommendation, or was it a once but never again kind of
I
listen?
really enjoyed it. I saved the album when you recommended it so that I could listen to it, and I'm not at the moment planning to unsave it. It's there in my Spotify library, and I enjoyed it a lot.
You think you'll throw a few songs into some
I've already
playlists?
done that. I've already done that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what we love to see. Um, I'll just quickly pick some favorite tracks. I agree with all of yours. I'll also say Angel Dust. I just find it very catchy. It just gets stuck in my head. Please don't fuck with the angel
Mm.
dust, you know. Polo Jeans is a personal favorite. I know you've already picked that one. Happy Birthday. I mean, man, I'm just looking at it like I could just list all these off. Happy Birthday, Wedding, and Funeral. That little trio is really fun. Ave Maria. I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna go through and name
The
every
whole
track,
album.
but if you only have time for a couple of these, then maybe the ones that we've just picked, and also the bonus track. Yeah, that was added to the streaming release. It's also on the vinyl, and interestingly, on the vinyl, it gets a whole side of a record to itself. Because everything else fits quite neatly on the other sides, and then it's just like, oh, we've just got the last little bonus track to go on the end. But just a real quick thing about the vinyl. It's all colourful and lovely and yellows and blues, and it's a really nice one to own. So if you ever got the opportunity to own this on vinyl, I 100% recommend it. But yeah, the bonus track it just hits the spot for me. It just hits that kind of perfect like spot of Mac Miller's discography that's melancholic, vibey, a bit sad, but also just kind of a mood setter, I think is the way I'd describe it. I think that's what Mac has always excelled at, is whatever mood you're looking to set, whatever playlist you're wanting to make. If you put one of his tracks as the first song, like he's got so many things to choose from. If you want to go like funky, vibey, a little bit sad, a little bit happy, summery, wintry, there's a Mac Miller song for that. And I think this whole album is full of mood setters. This whole mixtape, even.
I think they're good closing thoughts. I also want to add, have you listened to Pinata by Freddie Gibbs? I feel like we must have talked about this.
Yes.
But I realised that was probably the first place I heard a Mac Miller verse, and I just love his verse on that. It's incredible flow. It's got his usual tongue-in-cheek kind of manner. I actually couldn't hear some of the stuff that he was saying, even despite just liking the flow. So I looked it up just before this, and yeah, some of the lyrics are just quite witty and quite sort of walking the line in the way that you were describing before. And it's also just a killer beat by Madlib. One of these brilliant kind of a whole crew getting on a song kind of track. So well worth the listen as a little bonus material.
Yeah, that's the further listening this week. That's the homework.
Exactly. Did you have any round off stuff? Is this?
Yeah. So I really liked your little quiz last week, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun if every time we do an album, we do a little quiz based off the very literal interpretation of the album name.
Amazing. Okay.
So, obviously, last week's was First Ladies of the United States. So I thought I'd give you a little quiz. I've only got a few questions here. Maybe I'll Google some and find some more. But I feel like we've been going on quite a long time, to be fair. So maybe we can make this a speed round. So these are just some facts about some quiz questions about faces. You know,
Amazing.
the human face.
Brilliant. A subject I know.
I had this, and I had another idea. Go on.
I was just gonna say, it's a subject I know lots about. I have one myself.
I like the fact you sprung a bunch of quiz questions on me last week that I had not last week, 2 weeks ago, that I had absolutely no idea were coming, and I didn't know anything about. And I think that's a really fun theme. So I don't expect you to know any of these, but I sure as hell expect you to answer them.
Great. Okay.
As best you can. And for future podcasts, an idea I'm just going to kind of run past you real quick now. I wasn't able to find any for this week, which is a shame. I did have a proper look, but I was thinking it could be fun to try and find for some of the albums that we find, to try and find some reviews, not like proper ones, not like by music journalists or like Fantano or anything like that. Like ones that just angry internet people have written.
Amazing. Yes.
And like if we could find, like, it turns out it's harder to do than you'd think, because I was thinking, like, whenever you have a movie or a TV show that people love, or a video games are the perfect example of this. You can look it up on like Amazon, for example, sort by 1-star review, and find some absolutely outrageous take that is just wrong, and then you can laugh at it. and I was like, oh, maybe there'll be like reviews for this album on Amazon or on Metacritic or My Music or whatever. Had a good look. First of all, very, very few places this album has been reviewed by general audiences, and where it has, unfortunately, everybody else also loves it. So I wasn't able to find any like angry reviews. But I think Amazon will be the place if we do a more kind of commercial album at some point. It's always worth kind of checking there for that. But that's kind of an idea I've had for.
I love the idea of that. That sounds amazing.
Okay, it's face quiz time.
Sorry,
ready?
I've got a very quick. We can cut this out. But
Oh yeah,
I've just tried.
you're not just sat there googling
No,
face facts, are you? Because that's all I did for these questions.
um, I've just gone to Reddit because I feel like Reddit is a cesspit of bad takes, and I haven't actually fully read this, so we can
Oh
cut
yeah.
it afterwards. Hopefully, I left enough space there.
Okay.
But this is somebody that's got a post that says, "What is Faces all about?" And they basically say how they love all his work, and they spend a lot of time talking about how much they love all his work, and then they get to, but Faces, Jesus. I mean, I tried hearing it once, but was not really focused. I didn't understand what it was for. I heard some one of a kind songs like Grand Finale and Colours and Shapes that capital letters blew my mind, but I still can't grasp what's the meaning of it all. I'm really not sure why they're so confused, and I'm not sure whether they hate it. Like uh, I guess they've said that they like some of it, even though they don't understand it. And then the top comment is just Faces is about the human psyche. Edit. Also drugs.
I mean, I think that's a good roundup. I think if I had to pick what it was about, I'd say it's about Mac Miller. It
Hmm.
feels very much like a autobiography mixtape in a way. Every little track is a little reference to what's going on with him in his head, in his world. And even the ones that are more abstract is kind of like a glimpse of his more kind of fun personality side of things. I think it's very interesting to kind of listen to an album or a project and go, but what's it about? Like, surely,
That's why it caught my
surely there's a lot of
attention.
very abstract works out there, right? Like, a lot of the time it's about whatever it makes you feel. Like, it doesn't have to be about, unless I'm missing something, unless all of Mac Miller's have albums have like secret real meanings behind them or something that I'm unaware of. But as far as I'm aware, most music projects can just, you know, be about drugs and the human psyche, and then everything else you can kind of pick up what messages you like and what you don't vibe with.
Wo-
That is an interesting one.
Words of wisdom there, Louis. Now Faces.
Yeah. Now faces. Uh so Ronan, how many muscles in a face does it take to smile?
Ooh, 139. That sounds like a lot, actually. Yeah, 139.
It's like, all you're gonna do is guess one arbitrary number and then swap it to another arbitrary number. So you might as well leave it with your initial arbitrary number, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
Although you are significantly off. It's 43 apparently. Um, although there were other websites that claimed it to be 23. So anywhere in that ballpark is probably fine. Around the 20 to 50 mark.
I feel like I had a shot at that, blew it.
You did. You were. I mean, you were relatively close. You could have gone significantly higher. Like you were in the, you know,
I could have done.
within
I don't really
range.
know. I don't know what constitutes a muscle.
A muscle.
As in like how. So like, is a bicep one muscle?
Yes.
Because that's quite big, and but so the face just has lots. I'm going to sound stupid here, so I'm going
Lots
to
of
stop
little
talking.
as biology
Keep going, Louis.
Well, you might know this one though. To be fair, you might know this one. What are the ears and the nose made from?
Cartilage.
Yeah. Same thing that Sharks made.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Oh, really? Wow.
Mm.
God, that's a slightly more interesting fact, to be honest.
Sadly,
Fascinating.
the album wasn't
Sorry,
called
not
Shark, so maybe
Yeah, we need more shark
maybe we'll
facts.
find a Shark album at some point and do Shark facts.
That sounds good.
What is the name? You won't know this one, but I'm curious to know what word you come out with for this. What is the name of the neurological disorder where you can't see faces?
I feel like I should know this though because I think I have this. I like not all the time, but I am particularly guilty of just completely missing people that I know, and even when I wear my glasses, but especially bad, obviously, when I don't wear my
That's not.
glasses.
You don't have a disorder. You're just rude.
Yeah, and I'm helping to spread the excuse now. Legitimately though, I do. I've got some kind of weird facial recognition thing. I swear. I'm sure everybody's on a spectrum of it. Um, Misfacioma. I've just put miss faces essentially
Nice, yeah.
together there,
I was
and then
interested.
put oma because it sounds vaguely medical.
Yeah. It's prosopagnosia, I think, is how it's pronounced.
Ooh.
Feel free to email in and tell me that I mispronounced that. That's what they say on podcasts, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think we've established
we do have an
last
email
time
address
that we're
now.
constantly gonna. Do we? Wow.
I had to make one to start
God,
uploading these things to various podcasting sites. So feel free to email into more of something else entirely at gmail.com. All one word. It looks like quite a mess, but if you can spell it all correctly, if you successfully spell it all as one big chunk of text, I will receive the email. So feel free to do that. On average, the skin on your face is 16 cells thick. How thick
Wow.
is the skin on your lips?
Oof. 139. I'm just gonna repeat that number.
Nowhere near this time at all. The skin on your lips is only 5 cells thick. Very thin.
Oh really? It's
That's
less
why
thick.
they get very red, because the blood's very near the surface.
That makes sense. I think I was confusing cells with just the general thing that we were talking about there, because I was just thinking lips are quite thick, aren't they? Yeah, I just kind of went with that. And again, now I'm really feeling stupid. So thanks for that, Louis.
You're welcome, because this is how you made me feel last time. So I look forward to whatever arbitrary topic next time's quiz is. Which,
Amazing.
speaking of, they're the only questions I got, because as it turns out, there isn't that many interesting facts about the face that you can turn into questions. They're all just very much just your face is symmetrical when you do this. It's like, okay, I don't know how to. Resting bitch face is actually a real phenomenon. It's like, okay, cool. I can't turn that into a quiz question. But my last question to you is, what is going to be your pick for next session? What do you want me to listen to?
First of all, I just want to say that resting bitch faces fact sounds very much like something I would see on Facebook with the words "science says" before it.
Yeah, and a picture of a minion.
Yeah, and a picture of a minion. Yeah. Yeah, what is it with like boomers and the obsession with minions? Anyway, right. I kind of want to give you a choice without saying what the two albums are.
Oh God.
I've got one that's a bit more of, I'd say, a classic. Whereas I've got one that's sort of, I've come across it and I really like it. So one's newer, one's older. The older ones, I guess, what would be considered a classic. It's we might have listened to the classic one in New Zealand. I can't particularly remember. I don't really want to give too much more information
Yeah.
about them because I'll probably just reuse them
I
at
assume,
some point.
yeah, I'm gonna say I hope you have them both like written down or memorized because you've tempted me with both of them. I think this time I'm gonna choose the one that's the newer one, the one that you've come across and that you've enjoyed.
Brilliant. Okay,
But I'd like to go back and do the other one another time, so keep it in mind.
sure. No, that sounds good. Okay, the album for next time is Chinatown Slalom. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Ooh, I like. Which
I
one's
can send.
the album name and which one's the artist name?
The artist's name is Chinatown Slalom,
Okay,
and the
cool.
album is called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Yeah,
Millionaire.
it's called that. uh,
I don't
uh,
have to spell all the
it's
the.
it's a long title with a lot of S's and B's and L's and just
Mm,
a little bit sort of like that. It's a hard one to spell, but
tongue
I'll send it
hurdles.
over.
Yeah, very exciting. Should I go in blind?
I think so. I don't know. I guess it's different because so last time, I'll say this. I think you'll like this one.
Mm-hmm.
It's one that I would actively share with you.
Mm,
I think. No, yeah, I won't say any more than that. I
okay.
think you'll like it though.
It's going to be good when we get to the stage of doing this where we've gone through all the ones that we think we'll both like, and we're like, I've picked this one just to fuck with you. I think you're going to hate it, but you have to listen to
Oh,
it
I did. I did consider. I did consider a few albums that were basically like that. I thought it was too early as well, given that I didn't realize we were actually going to have listeners, and now I know that there are one or two listeners. I I just kind of want to avoid making their ears bleed just yet.
Well, they don't have
So
to listen to it. They can just listen to our suffering afterwards, to be fair.
that's
So,
true. But I was even more surprised to hear that some of the listeners then actually listened to the album. So I'd rather
mm.
at the moment not piss them
Spread
off
the
too
love
much.
of good music and not spread too much
Oh,
great
it's still
horrible
good
bullshit.
music. No,
Fair
no,
enough.
it's still good music. It's just there was some stuff that was more abrasive than others in
Oh,
my
I'm definitely gonna be picking some abrasive
possible
stuff down the
options.
line. Don't you worry.
Mm,
We're gonna have
okay.
we're gonna be challenging each other as this goes, and that's part of the fun, I think. And we'll bring on some
That sounds
challenging
good.
guests as well.
Mm.
But I think I'll just say as well, I like that you've definitely chosen an album and an artist name combination, of which I could not even begin to guess what the unrelated quiz would be on. It could
I
be on
kind
any of these combinations.
I mean that is true. Yeah, actually I maybe I'll do a broader quiz on various parts. I'll have to see.
Ooh,
I'll
exciting.
just I'll decide closer to the time.
Right. In terms of a round off, I'll just say we are now on so fucking dumb. We're now on Spotify, we're on iTunes, we're on SoundCloud, and we're on basically everywhere you can find a podcast as far as I'm aware. So if you've made it to the end, if you somehow, I don't know why people do this at the end of podcasts, but if you've managed to make it to the end of the podcast on a platform that you dislike, you can find us elsewhere. We have the email, which is more of something else at gmail.com, which you can send us hate mail as much as you like. Or thoughts on albums. If you listen to something after we've recommended it or talked about it and you have some thoughts you want to share, you can email us, and maybe if we get any emails, we'll do like a mailbag section. We'll go through and maybe, I don't know, that's an idea, right?
I mean,
Um,
that's definitely a way of enticing hate mail, though,
yeah.
because hate mail is just funnier.
Well, I won't
Um,
read hate mail unless it's very funny. I don't,
yeah, that sounds like a challenge, but please don't, because my feelings are
please
easily
don't
hurt.
harass me. We're delicate souls. We're into music, of course, delicate souls. Um, I don't have anything else to plug yet. We don't have any social media accounts or anything yet, but maybe one day. Um, I will put another link to my donation drive because that's still going in the description. And is there anything that you want to plug? Like anything you want me to put a link to or anything?
Um, no, I was thinking of making a stupid joke about having become a plug salesman then, but I didn't have any way to make that work. So there you are. You're getting the raw idea without the
Yeah.
actual execution, which I feel like is my general approach to witticisms. Oh God,
Yeah.
yeah, it's got to that point. I think that's that's my round off.
That's it.
Well, also, I should give just another big shout out to you for having organised all of this and having spent time editing. Absolutely smashing it all. So cheers for that.
No, thank you. My pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to join me and have these stupid conversations that just go on forever.
It's been a pleasure.
Um, I guess thank you for listening. If there's anyone out there, and goodbye.
Cracking.
Cracking.